All right, so I am here talking about Dolby Atmos in UE5. This is our big announcement for the show, is that we now have a Dolby Atmos plugin for Unreal 5. I'm Alistair Hurst. I'm Senior Game Developer Relations Manager at Dolby. And today we're going to be covering this new plugin, how you get it working in Unreal, how you configure it, and then we'll be playing some demos, some really awesome demos in my opinion, that will sort of show off the creative possibilities that you get with Atmos in a game, and then we'll sort of cover some of the things you can think about when you're putting your game into Atmos and showing you how we did some of these things in our demos. So we're going to start off by playing Lyre just to give you a sense of our first demo of what's involved with Atmos. And Lyre is the starter game that comes with Unreal. You can download it off the Epic Launcher. And I'll talk in a bit after we play it of what we did to get it into Atmos. All right.
I'm going to jump off into the abyss to reload my grenades because I have way too much fun here.
Okay. Let me know when you're ready.
Okay, I cannot seem to reload grenades, so you're going to have to fuck a grenade at me, mister.
Okay.
No,
Which button was that on there?
it is a bumper button on the controller.
I don't have a controller.
Yeah, it's left bumper.
All right. So what you're listening here is for the spatialization of all this great stuff.
Oh, it's on, huh?
Uh,
All right.
I'll just stand here for a second so you can hear.
How's your left ear? How's your right ear? Put one right over your head. And one down at your feet. And one right that you can because I can. Want to do footsteps?
Sure.
All right.
So you can hear smooth panning, you can hear stuff up in the heights clearly.
We're at my house. Which one get?
I don't know. Where'd he go? Where'd he go? All right, that happy ending. Let's bail out of this.
There's a talk about the weapons this afternoon at noon, right?
Yeah, I'll cover that in a sec here.
Empty your slides, I'm sorry.
It's okay. There we go. Okay. So, brief aside about the music and the weapons before I get into that is music is composed by Rich Freeland, also known as Disasterpiece. It's procedural and it's using meta sounds. And it's in stereo for this demo, but I think it would be super cool to put this in Atmos. It would be pretty interesting. And then, there's a talk about the weapons today, the way they did the sound design with meta sounds in this room at noon from Gustav. I just, a quick aside, I'm super excited about this stuff. Like, I've been in the game industry a long time. I've gone through all these console shifts and things. And it feels, I love this feeling because you get these stair steps as, the consoles, you get next generation of console, and then a little bit after that, you get the tools that come along that take advantage of the console. And it feels to me, the Unreal 5, that, we're getting another step up again with meta sounds and, Atmos in there now. So we're, our creative possibilities just keep getting bigger and bigger in games, decade after decade. So that's what this feels like to me. So it's always super exciting to me. So, how did we get this into Atmos? Basically, all that was involved was downloading and installing the Dolby Atmos plugin. And then you go to the project settings, and you can see under plugins here, you can verify that Dolby Atmos has been installed. And then, since we're on Windows right now, you would click on Windows under Platforms, scroll down here to the Audio tab, and under Spatialization Plugin, select Dolby Atmos. So 5 minutes, it's in Atmos. Boom. Because the project was set up for spatialization beforehand, so very easy to get it in. That's what we did to get. So you could do this yourself easily too, then, and that's how you would do it. So a bit of history of spatial audio. Our first consoles when they came out were in mono back in the dark days. TVs were in mono, right? Then we went to stereo. Around the era of the 3DO, we had Dolby Pro Logic appeared on the scene. Then the Xbox was the first console to support Dolby Digital, so we were able to get 5.1 back then. Then later consoles like the PlayStation 4 went up and supported Dolby Digital Plus, which took us to 7.1 channels. And this brings us to today's era of Dolby Atmos, where we have 7.1.4 as well as objects running on the Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, and the iPhone and select Android phones. And the number of phones that support it are expanding daily. So that's sort of how we got here today. So this is the latest, greatest. And so what Dolby Atmos does is it surrounds you with sound, right? All around you. And it also provides you extra objects, sound objects, which have greater localization precision, okay? And it works on both speakers and headphones, which is key for gamers because we know a lot of gamers play their games on headphones. So it's a big step up. Quickly review this in case some people don't know what these numbers mean. The first number here, the 7, is the number of planar speakers around the player's head. The middle digit there is the number of subwoofers in the system. And the last digit is the number of height channels in a particular system. So that's what the digits mean. And those can vary depending on the configuration of the system. Right? You can have 5.1.2, et cetera, et cetera. All right, part of Dolby's mission says to give consumers a premium entertainment experience regardless of how or where they choose to enjoy it. And so what the Dolby technology does is give you the best presentation that you can get on whatever device you're playing it on. And how the ecosystem for Dolby works is that we create these tools for creatives like you who then go off and create Dolby-enabled content. And then we also work with device manufacturers like the game consoles, mobile phones, PCs, and we get the Dolby Atmos renderers put into those devices. And then we work with the various endpoint manufacturers to get our technology into there so the whole ecosystem works with the content that people like you will create. And so what are the various endpoints that are Dolby enabled? Well, we have audio-video receivers, so that's how you can play back Atmos content in home theaters. Can range from smaller systems up to 7.1.4 and sometimes even higher. We have sound bars now, which do a very good job of supporting Atmos. With one HDMI cable, you can plug that in and they will bounce sound off the ceilings. They can bounce sound off the walls. Some of them have wireless rear speakers, wireless subwoofers. So that's a category that's really taking off a lot and doing well. So there's a lot of endpoints there. There are TVs that support Atmos. They have speakers in the back that are backfiring and will fire off the ceiling to give you your sense of heights. As I mentioned before, we have Atmos supported in mobile phones now. Cars, which will be a great venue for a Dolby Atmos for music, right? So that's another area that's growing for Dolby Atmos. And then, as I mentioned before, headphones, right, which is pretty key for gamers because a lot of gamers are on headphones. So that's why this whole category of Atmos-enabled content, we have the full ecosystem of music, streaming media, it's in film theaters, and now games is expanding into Atmos. A quick note on Dolby Atmos for headphones and how that works, because not everyone understands it. Basically, we have what's called bed channels in Atmos, 7.1.4. And so for headphones, what we do is we put virtual speakers, that 7.1.4 speaker array, like what we have in real life here, that gets put into the headphones. And then we also have individual objects, which can also be moving around, that have really good locational precision. And then we run what's called a head-related transfer function for each of those. And you can look that up if you're not aware of how that works, because we don't have time for that. But it's a pretty interesting field. But anyway, we apply these head-related transfer functions to all those objects. And that's how we spatialize it and binauralize it so it surrounds the listener in headphones. All right, this is kind of the key to understanding what's going on in Atmos. At least it helps me if I understand how the signal flow works. So the middleware and the audio engine for Unreal Engine has a 7.1.4 panner, and you can put your various sound effects or dialogue or what have you into the panner, and you can pan that around XYZ coordinates. Okay, so and that feeds into, at the moment, a 7.1 bus. That will be a 7.1.4 bus eventually in Unreal. And then right now for heights, the way it's working for the demos you'll hear today is for the height stuff is we feed it in and we have a top front and a top rear set of speakers for the height stuff currently. And then we have the individual Dolby Atmos objects, right, which can come out of that 7.1.4 panner. The important thing to notice here is that those do not go through the 7.1 bus, right? So they keep their location separately, and that is passed along as the Dolby Atmos object with the metadata for the Dolby Atmos object. And all this stuff, actually I got one more. If there's things that you don't want to spatialize, there's a thing called a pass-through bus, which is stereo, and so that won't get spatialized. So if you have, for example, music, most games are still using stereo music, but as we're moving in, and you'll hear in our demo, spatial music is an object, but if you're still using stereo music, you could use a pass-through, or you could use that for maybe UI sound effects or internet voice chat, what have you. So you have that bus. So we have this series of buses that all gets fed into the Dolby Atmos renderer, which is in the OS layer of the Windows or your Xbox PC or on the mobile phone, right? So it gets passed over this API. And then the renderer takes care of putting that into a Dolby Atmos bitstream that then gets passed over HDMI to your home theater endpoint or your soundbar or what have you, or it binauralizes it and sends it to Dolby Atmos for headphones on this part of it. And you don't need any special set of headphones that works with any set of headphones. This is key. Is there any question here? I'm just going to pause here, because if you understand this, the rest is pretty easy. It's just the way we've done things traditionally. Yeah?
Do you need any software to be able to run for headphones? If you're
yes, you do need software to run it for headphones. You download Dolby Access, and then you can configure it for the PC. And same thing on Xbox. You just download Dolby Access and install it and configure it there. All right, so specifics now for Unreal. To set up your bed channels, that main bus, you take a sound field, and that would go to 7.1.4. Or so on Xbox and PC, it's pretty clever. You would configure that in your Windows settings so the user has a choice. If they turn on spatialization, it automatically becomes a 7.1.4 bus. If they have spatialization turned off, it'll just be stereo. Okay? So that's what I mean by the auto-detected. And so you set up your submix. So here it is over here. And then for your sound field, the encoding format, you would choose Dolby Atmos. And now you have your Dolby Atmos bed. For assigning an asset or a sound cue to the beds, so for example, we've got the sound here called Collapse 01. You just come down to your submix, enable the bass submix, and then assign that to the bass submix that you set up for Atmos. You can also, if say you're doing streaming cinematics and you've bring in a 7.1.4 WAV file. It supports multi-channel WAV files, and you could play a multi-channel WAV file through this. Just make sure you have SMPTE channel order. That's the order it's expecting. You can look it up when time comes for what that order needs to be. All right, for object buses, as I mentioned before in that signal flow diagram, they're routed separately from the main bus. And the reason we keep them separate is because they have the metadata of the XYZ coordinates of where they are in the game space, right? And so I said before they had greater localization precision, and that's because each one of those Dolby Atmos objects gets its own HRTF as it's moving frame by frame, so that's why it's really good for the localization and the spatialization. And if you run out of the number of objects, there's a limited number of objects available on the systems. If you run out of them, you will still hear it. It'll just be played back in the bed channels instead of from an object. So what are the maximum number of objects? Windows headphones, you get 16 objects. On top of the bed here is an 8.1.4.4. So it adds an extra rear center channel. You have your height channels, and then that last .4 is 4 channels below you on headphones. Okay? Windows going over HDMI, you get 20 objects on top of the 7.1.4 bed. And that's because we have a limitation of 32 audio streams over HDMI. That's part of the HDMI spec. For Android and iPhone at the moment, there are no objects available. But we know how tech works, right? Okay, so this is what it looks like to actually assign these things. So here we have footstep sound. Scroll down to your attenuation spatialization. Click the enable spatialization, and then choose binaural. So this term binaural is a little outdated now. It's going to change in the future to spatial or spatial bus or something like that. But basically, that's just how you would assign it for an object, and then it knows it's an object. And like I said, if you run out of objects that are instantiated, it can fall back to the beds, and that all happens under the hood invisibly to you. And then I talked about the pass-through bus before. This is if you want to put something out there that doesn't have any HRTF filtering for spatialization. So you can potentially put stereo music through there, UI sound effects, voice chat. What you do there is you set up a sound field and you just don't put the Atmos plugin on it. Then it won't be spatialized. So these are the supported platforms that we have. Will be coming. Windows 10 is up and running now. Soon we will have Xbox One and Xbox Series X and S working, as well as the select Android phones. So that's currently where we're in a private beta at the moment. All right, now we're going to play some more demo material for you. I'll let Andy take over driving, and we'll go through this a couple times. This first time, I'm going to just let it go and just enjoy and listen, and then we'll talk about what went into creating this.
Just a minute to get things started.
So we're doing this live, so you can see it's working, and here it is. All right. If you just came in, come on in and sit in some of the seats up here so you can hear the heights and everything properly. So what I'm going to do now is pull apart that mix a bit for you and explain what went into it. So this is the crew that came to Dolby HQ and worked on this. A lot of Epic folks, a few Dolby folks. Had Dan Reynolds joined us virtually via laptop. There's another shot of the studio that we mixed this in. So these are the things that we thought about and some of the things that we did for this mix, just so you get a sense of what, as we were tackling this, what did we do? So this is a pre-existing project that was upgraded on the graphics side, and it seemed like a good time to upgrade the audio too. So some of the things that we did were we took the ambiances and we routed those to a 7.1.4 sound field. And so all the channels were correlated, and that's a pretty effective way to get your ambiances there in full surround. The music stems, we took the original music, and then it's pretty ambient, as you heard, and it's made up of 3 layers. Okay, and so we pulled the music back out into the room to leave the front channels here for the sound effects, right? So the first layer is back right at those side surrounds. Then there's a layer a little bit behind that, and then there's a layer in the rears. And then the ambient flute we put in the top rears there. And it's a pretty ambient kind of, there's a lot of delay and reverb on the flute, so that was pretty effective. So you basically got surrounded in the rear there for the music to set the tone there, and then the front for sound effects. So if that flute hadn't been so ambient, that may not have been a good choice, because you might have wondered, why is there a flute player in the tree up there, right? So that's one of those things you got to consider when you're spatializing your music. Is it distracting, or does it fit into this whole thing? And I think it's particularly effective for this. And then the 3D sound points that were already there for that demo, we routed those to the Dolby Atmos objects, and you could hear everything was spatializing quite well. So creative considerations when you're doing this work in Atmos. As I mentioned, we decided to push the music back so that the focus could be on the front for the sound effects. It leaves a lot of sonic space there. So ask yourself, does this feel natural and supportive, or is it unusual and disjointed? So it depends on the type of music, right? If it was super active music and there's things flying all over the place, maybe that's not the effect you would have wanted. So think about that kind of thing. One choice we had was the music is being procedurally generated with various chunks coming in and out. We had the option where we could have randomly panned each layer as it came in. We decided not to do that. We kept it fixed so that it wouldn't get distracting, right? We just wanted this ambient music to sort of envelop the listener. And then, as I mentioned with the flute, it's this ambient flute part, which it's in the top rear heights there. Just kind of, it gets its own space, and it just fit really nicely that way. So that was some of the considerations we took with the music. Some other questions you should think about is forced or natural spatial placement. So the wind and the thunder, for example, it's not tied to any particular element, so we can move it around where we wanted. And so that is being randomly panned around, just like real wind and thunder would be. And then the dangling skeletons, those are objects. Things that localize really well, especially in heights, would be stuff that has a lot of high frequencies, right? And that you would tend to hear from up top. So those, when we go through it again, you'll notice, spatialize really well as the birds taking off. You expect birds to take off, but it's a noise, lots of noise in that sample, so it's spatialized as well, not a ton of bottom end stuff. Okay, so some things to know when you're working on this thing. So the surround and the height channels in Atmos are being bass managed, which means if those speakers can't handle frequencies below a certain frequency, they can be rerouted to your subwoofer. So you can put full frequency signal into the surround and height channels. Stuff that's below 100 hertz doesn't localize well. So for the thunder, you want more than just the rumble. You want some stuff that's the crack in there, and that'll get spatialized well when it's up in the heights or in the surrounds. We also added a separate LFE channel for the thunder to give that extra boom in there. So there was a separate LFE channel. Keep in mind for LFE, if this was folded down all the way down to stereo, when you do a fold down from Atmos or 5.1 or 7.1 to a stereo, the LFE channel gets discarded, right? So the LFE is there to enhance and give you some extra boom for a system that can handle it. But if you're, say, playing on an iPad, which can't reproduce that anyway, that'll get discarded. So don't put all your low-frequency stuff just in the LFE, okay? And then another thing you could consider doing is a dome surround for reverbs, or maybe you want quad for reverb. Some games are using quads, and your background ambiances. Something that's been done in some games is for the first reflections, if you're in a cave, say, or a very high ceiling cathedral, you can put objects up top there and your first reflections are coming off that. So that can be an effective thing to do for that. All right. Don't do's. Don't put key dialogue in the heights. So an example of that is you don't know necessarily what the home playback environment is going to be. So some people may be using sound bars that are using the up-firing speakers or side speakers with up-firing. You don't necessarily know, well, you don't know what their ceiling is made of or if it's at weird angles. So you don't necessarily know if you're going to get completely accurate playback from the heights in all situations in a home playback situation. So something key like dialogue that you know you need to be heard, that would be not a good choice to put in the heights. And that you should, check your final mix on speakers and headphones. Generally, it translates quite well. Fold downs, which is when you go from 7.1.4 to, say, 5.1, or stereo, you should check those out. Dolby does a very good job, and I've been in the meetings where a lot of attention is paid to make sure that as things fold down, the intent of the mix is still there, and there's not much, you can trust the fold down, but you should check it just to make sure that everything's coming across in stereo and 5.1 as well as it is in Atmos. Okay, so now I've sort of stepped you through our thought process and some of the creative stuff that went in there. We're going to go through it again, and this time we'll solo out some of the things so you can hear more clearly what I was talking about. So you can see we've got the debug stuff on, so you can see the various sound objects that are being called. So it's just music, so you can hear the stems and how they were panned around. Let's hang out a bit, sure. So you can hear the flapping banner. If Andy rotates here, you can hear how it pans smoothly all across all the speakers. So these are the bones hanging in the trees, which are individual sound objects. They localize really well. Cool. All right. Let's go back to the PowerPoint for now. Cool. Thank you. Okay. So, you can go to this URL if you'd like to find out some more about this. And we've got about just over 10 minutes. So are there any questions?